more for recently established therapists and rehabilitationists. It's just an introduction to what should be done by way of rehabilitation and parent guidance. Now, why is early intervention so important? Rajesh has touched on a lot of, there will be a lot of overlap because it all has to do with the same thing of the importance of early intervention. And contrary to general belief, more than 95% of hearing impaired children have residual hearing that can be developed and they can be trained to listen and speak. This is true of very profoundly deaf children also. I have a 23-year-old student who does not have a cochlear implant, but through listening he can speak quite clearly. I mean, you'd understand him. There are problems in his speech because he does not have certain frequencies available to him, but his language is fluent and he can also speak on the telephone. Now this is a little detail as to why early intervention is important. At birth, most of the neural circuitry is in place, but functional connections are waiting stimulation. Within the first 2 years, a child has doubled the number of neural connections as compared to that to an adult brain. And there are significant changes in behavior and performance. The ability of the brain to constantly reorganize itself is known as neuroplasticity. And the period of most dramatic plasticity is during the first 2 years of life, as the infant's brain becomes organized in response to its environment. This basically means that in the first 2 years of a child's life, we should be stimulating the child in every way possible. For learning, there are 4 areas that are important. There's vision, there's emotions, there's speech and language, and there's logic. And in all 4 areas, the child must be stimulated to the maximum. These are the 4 critical areas and the critical periods for them to develop where maximum plasticity takes place. Vision up to 6 months, emotions up to 18 months. We know how important it is for language to develop a combination of visual stimulation and through spoken language. It's not that one can't develop without the other, but of course it's necessary for good speech and language to develop to have all these areas stimulated at the right period. Logic and maths up to 4 years. In vision, there is an experiment was done on a cat where it was blindfolded from the time it was born, and after 6 months when the blindfold was open, it was blind. Emotions play a very big role in developing a child in social, educational, in all areas of its personality. You know, you take something like, you see a little child who is exposed all the time to his father beating him up, or rather beating the wife up because he's drunk, and he's hiding and cowering behind the mother, and he sees this all through his childhood. But when he grows up and gets married, you'll find him beating up his wife. And everyone turns around and says, he saw his mother suffering, but he's doing the same thing. But that is how plasticity took place in his childhood. So it just goes to say that whatever a young child is exposed to is what is going to stay with him for the rest of his life, unless he is taught what is wrong and what is right. Now, the critical windows for learning have important implications for parents, therapists, caretakers and educators of infants to understand, as it is their input that will directly influence the child's future. Appropriate environmental stimulation is crucial for the brain to develop to its fullest potential. The window for development of speech and language is birth to 3 years, and the first 2 years are the most important. The vocabulary of an adult is determined to a great extent by the speech they hear during the first 3 years of their lives. The brain concentrates on the phonemes that make up syllables and words and builds connections that allow us to recognize these sounds as words. If the child is not exposed to language during this time, either due to hearing impairment or lack of auditory stimuli, speech will not develop properly. We also have, you find many mothers that they'll feed their children, they'll change nappies, but at every stage they pack them to sleep. They think that the child needs to go to sleep after everything that they need to interact with them about. I mean, only the necessary things are interacted over, and otherwise they want the child to sleep most of the time. But that is the time when the child can pick up a lot of speech and language. That is the time when parents, therapists should be using all kinds of stimulation to help the child develop better. When critical windows of opportunity are missed, it doesn't mean that a child will never be able to learn, but the process slows down considerably. And we've done early detection and intervention, but it is very important to realize that just by fitting hearing aids, the child is not going to learn to speak. You need very good habilitation, and that is the only way that the child will develop spoken language. Now, why we call it an auditory approach is, I know everyone is talking about auditory verbal therapy, and partially we do that as well. It is a very strong foundation. It's very necessary to know what auditory verbal therapy is all about. You have to know how to apply it in the right places. But what has happened is that was first actually developed for hearing aid users. It is I find that for early intervention, it is not so necessary, because once early intervention for children with cochlear implants, sorry, I must clear that. Just for hearing aid users, it is very essential to develop speech and language. But for babies who have cochlear implants, you're going to treat them like a hearing child. So you don't tell a parent of how to talk to its baby. It just comes naturally, and that is how speech and language develops. So we call it an auditory approach because all through with individual children one has to make some adjustments. You can't stick to auditory verbal therapy. Now, good audiological management is crucial. Of course, selection of appropriate skilled and effective habilitation must commence immediately. Parent participation. Empowering parents to become the primary facilitators in the development of their child's listening skills and spoken language. You know, we take it for granted that parents know how to interact with their children, but actually they don't. We talk about parent participation, but they really have to learn how to communicate with their deaf child. And that's where we come in as habilitationists, to make it comfortable for the parent to interact with the child. Meaningful interaction. Habilitation should be ongoing throughout the child's waking hours. It should be planned as well as incidental. Now, planned all of us do, and we tell the parents how to do it as well. But many of us miss a lot of opportunities to develop language when they're through incidental teaching. By incidental teaching, it is if a therapist has planned a lesson about the zoo and about elephants and whatever it is, and if the child interrupts and starts saying, yesterday I saw an elephant, and instead of expanding on that, you'll find the teacher turning around and saying, oh, very good, you saw an elephant, okay, now let's get back to what we're doing. So you're losing a lot of opportunities of developing the child's language by not making use of incidental situations. Provide an auditory environment is basically to have an environment that is as quiet as possible. One-to-one therapy, habilitation must be individual, and parents and other family members should be included. They should know how to communicate with the child. Habilitation sessions must be diagnostic. Now over here for early intervention, when I use the word diagnostic, I don't mean ticking off forms and keeping a list of things that the child should or shouldn't achieve. Because remember that we are trying to develop the child as normally as a hearing child. He has a cochlear implant, he can hear, and you will treat him exactly as you would a young hearing child. The monitoring has to come in if you find that the child is not developing enough, if he hasn't reached the stage where you think he should be, maybe 2-word phrases or 1-word communication, you really need to look into what is also being done at home. So what we've started in ORED is also that we give the parent 10 minutes to interact with the child within a therapy session. In this way we can monitor the way in which the parent interacts with the child, whether they're really speaking in full sentences, whether they're comfortable talking to a deaf child, and from there we can guide them how to go further. Listening skills should be developed without sign language and emphasis on lip reading. Teamwork is important. A child's ability to listen and speak will be compromised if all 10 guidelines of the auditory approach are not applied. Now these are just little hints for what to tell the parents. As I said earlier, we tell the parents, talk to your child at home. Just talk about anything and everything, but they don't know how to do it. I was in the car with one parent with her little child, and she was feeding that child lunch. She had this box open on the car seat. She had the child on her lap, and she filled 1 spoon of food, and then she said, ah, and the child's mouth would open and she'd shove it in. When he finished, then she'd say, finished. Then she'd fill up another spoon and push it into the mouth. Now think of the language opportunities that this parent was missing out on by not actually talking to the child while she was feeding it. So we need to encourage them to speak with their children. What we tell them is to talk to the child when giving it a bath, changing a nappy, or while feeding it. There is a wealth of language that the child can acquire during these activities. All these activities are part of the child's daily routine, and therefore reinforcement of language can take place automatically. Sing nursery rhymes, play music which is rhythmic, then hold the child's hand and clap to rhythm, play soothing music and rock the baby in your arms, simultaneously talk to the baby. Talk about body parts. Now if you think of all these things that I'm reading out, will have something to do with the 4 areas that need to be developed at this early age. That is vision, emotions, speech and language, and maths. Talk about body parts, arms, legs, fingers and toes while bathing the child. Count toes and fingers. Have some rubber toys in the tub for the child to play with. Play peekaboo while drying the baby by covering your face with a towel and responding immediately when you hear a gurgle or a chuckle. Call out to the baby from different sides of the cot. This will help with localization of sound. You can use soft toys and hand puppets of animals to introduce a few learning to listen sounds. Place the baby on your lap. Make sure the neck is supported and gently bounce the baby. Go bounce, bounce and down your legs. Do a book share with the baby. Talk about each picture. Make sure that the page is not congested with too many pictures. Take the baby for an outing every day. A park is a stimulating place for the child. Talk about the trees, flowers, children playing, and birds if there are any. So far the child has been accustomed to seeing little animals and stuffed toys. Make sure you make a trip to the zoo. It is important to give him a real perspective of the size of live animals. This again is an area where I made a very big mistake, and there was this little 2-year-old. He could pick up any animal that I asked him. I said, show me something with a trunk and show me something with a long neck, and an elephant and giraffe would come out promptly. And one day on a Sunday, I had a terrace where I used to grow sugarcane, and an elephant went past and I used to feed it 1 sugarcane every Sunday. So I called out to the boy and I said, come quickly, there's an elephant over here. And he came running and he took one look at the elephant and he didn't stop screaming for about 25 minutes. He was so frightened when he saw it. And you know, it took him, he was 2 years old then, up to the age of 4 or 5, you couldn't show him a real elephant. So that was a big lesson that I learned. It's very traumatizing. Count small ice cubes from one bowl into another, colorful jelly set, do bathing, book share, feeding activities with a doll, and allow the child to be in control when possible. We've done all this, we've taught it, the parent has worked with the child, then give the child an opportunity to show you what he has learned from his own routine. These are just a few examples of how parents can interact with their babies. Once they become comfortable talking to the child, they will automatically think of new ways to give their child meaningful auditory input all through the day. They will soon learn to make spontaneous use of situations in the house and will get accustomed to speaking with the child as the primary mode of communication in the same way that they would with a hearing baby. These are a whole lot of emotions mentioned over here. A child learns the global meaning of these expressions through exposure to different situations. Language is not just about communication through words. Language is a combination of verbal expression, facial expression, body language, and instinctive responses to different situations. What is important is that parents must have faith that their child will learn to listen and speak. Parents must believe in themselves and know that it is they who are eventually going to make a difference to the child's future. Thank you.